Time has become the new currency. The world is now at a point where it is obscenely expensive just to basically exist. And now we're seeing this diminishing returns in terms of income and financial wealth to time ratio, basically, where you work 40 hours a week, slaving away. You earn average money, maybe above, even above average. And what you get in return is not really a very average lifestyle. You get a very, probably below, maybe not below average, but it's not what it used to be 20 years ago. It's like you work 40 hours, you do all the things you're supposed to do, and if you're lucky, you can buy a house. Chances are you probably can't buy a house because it's insanely difficult to save enough money and to beat the housing market and to meet the affordability checks now that exist because interest rates are so high. And then let's say you're able to buy a house and you're able to get a house, and then it's like, okay, well, it's probably smaller than what you need. It's probably not like big enough to start a family. Or if it is big enough to start a family, you can only have one child. And then, you go to the shop and it costs you like £120 a week to exist on crap, ultra processed foods. Maybe you can afford takeaway, but if you do that, you're going to eat into your retirement savings or your long term investment savings. And you basically have to choose between, do I want to be financially secure? Do I want to be wealthy in the future? And by the future, I mean when you're 60 or 70, when the main part of your life is over. Or do you want to live for the moment, but basically have no pension and don't have wealth in the future? You can't have all three. All three of those things don't exist anymore just because of the ability to trade your time for money is way outpaced by inflation, cost of living, the cost of housing, and just generally speaking, the decline of life for a lot of people in a lot of Western countries. We're at this point where it just kind of doesn't make sense to put, for a lot of careers, it takes you like 5 years to get to your peak. Ignoring how destroyed the job market is and how ridiculous it is. And actually, there are a lot of jobs that are just asking for unicorns that have 20 years of experience and in all these ridiculous things. Like, just ignore that. Pretend it's like a normal job market. The average career to like get peak earnings and to be trained up, you maybe have to go to university first, then you have to do some courses, you have to get a qualification, and that gets you like a good salary of say like £50,000, which you could argue with inflation in the last 5 years, it's actually not. I mean, it is good, but it's not as good as it once was. But it takes you 5 years, maybe up to 10 years to get to that point. You put all that time in, and the life that it affords you is just meh. It's just buy a house that doesn't fit your needs. Can't really afford to have children. Or if you do, it's like a very reduced lifestyle. Best case scenario, like one holiday a year. Maybe you have an okay car, maybe you have a Beta, or maybe I don't know, maybe you have a fancy car, but then that even eats into everything else because cars are really expensive. So there's lots of compromises that you have to make. You can never excel in all areas. If you went back to like the 80s or 90s, you could basically excel in every area. You could earn good money with a ridiculously good defined benefits pension. You could save for the future. You could own multiple properties. You could have multiple sources of income. There was a lot less regulation. So you could start businesses really easy. Tax was, I suppose it depends, higher, in some ways higher, and in some ways lower. Interest rates were higher, but the prices of housing was way cheaper, so it didn't really hit you that much, and you could basically quite easily pay a mortgage off in 10 years as opposed to 25 years. Now people are looking to buy a house, and it's like, people are being recommended, don't get a 25-year mortgage, get a 30-year mortgage to make the repayments more affordable. That's like a very new thing. You can even get them as far as like 35 years. That's a very new thing. That wasn't a thing a few years ago. but it's become the thing. So we're at this point where trading time doesn't make sense to trade your time for money, really, because the ratio to what it affords you is just completely off, to the point where really the real currency that exists now is time. Like that's the real, I mean, it always has been. Time actually is your only real resource that you have any actual real control over. But money would kind of dwarf it because I don't know, you would have enough things to keep you occupied and your quality of life was high enough to kind of forget about the the expanse of time, I suppose. But now we're at this point where people are, I feel like people are they're looking at time and they're looking at money and they're going, is it actually worth it to trade as much time as I am for a quality of life that is just not that good for the amount of time I'm giving up? You know, spending 40 hours to be able to maybe afford a house, maybe go on one like cheap holiday a year, maybe have an okay used car, right? And maybe do like one or two cheap hobbies and maybe have one, maybe two kids. It's a bit like, what's the point? I feel like time is now how you measure wealth. And of course, like if you have lots of money, you also have lots of time because you don't have to work as much. So there is a point, but like that's in the millions, right? Like go back to like the early 2000s. If you had £1 million, you could retire on £1 million. You cannot retire on £1 million now. Like if you were to withdraw like 4% every year and get like 7% annual returns, you would run out of money within like 30 years or something like that. I haven't done the maths, but you'd run out in like 30 years. Realistically, if you're like, I don't know, 25 and you're like, okay, how much money would I need today to have like a decent quality of life, a paid off house? You know, how much money would I need to stop working now? You know, you'd be looking at probably 2.5, 3 million, probably. I mean, that's not like a hard number, but it's like it's not a million. It's higher. It's two and above basically, because it's got to last you a long time. It could potentially like have to last you 60, 70 years. And obviously inflation eats at it. But a million's not really enough anymore. And a million is quite an obtainable number, right? So that's why the ratio is off, because a million sounds like a lot. It is a lot. It is. I'm not saying it's not a lot, but it's not as much as it was. But it is an attainable number that you can hit. You know, if you work in a job with a decent enough salary, maybe that has like a good pension, maybe they contribute like, I don't know, a good decent, like they match you 10%, or maybe you're in like the civil service and they match like 28% or 29%. You can hit a million with probably 20, 25 years of work, which is a long time, but you know, you could start working at like 18, 19, 20 maybe, and by the time you're like 45, you could have a million across like your pension. You can count your house. I don't really think you should count your house as part of your net worth because you live in it, right? If, in additional property, sure, but if you live in it, I don't really think it counts, because what you're going to do, sell your house, where you're going to live, you're going to have to rent or buy another house. That doesn't really make sense. But across like your pension, maybe like stocks and shares ISA, general investment account, I don't know, whatever else cash, things like that. It's not impossible to hit a million. Like say you're on like 50,000, you'd have to quite aggressively save, and chances are your pension would be really big and your actual personal investments would be lower. But on 50,000, you could hit a million in probably 25 to 30 years if you were like regimented, and that would require a lot of sacrifice. So that ratio of time and effort to money wouldn't make sense. So that wouldn't really make sense. But you could do it. You could hit a million. But let's say you hit a million. You're like 45. You hit a million. You probably still can't retire. Like, okay, if your house is paid off and you don't have kids, maybe you can with a low enough withdrawal. But maybe you work part time, but you'd still have to work in some capacity. But you just couldn't. You couldn't be like, right, okay, I'm going to have the same quality of life, right, as I had when I was working, and I'm going to retire at 45 with £1 million. it's just not that realistic. It's definitely doable. It's definitely doable. And if you live in the UK and you have enough national insurance credits, contributions to get to the state pension, and the state pension still exists, it's definitely doable, but you'd have to lower your quality of life. Um, and in the future, the quality of life to the cost of living ratio is only going to get higher. So bills never get lower. It's not like that's never happened before, where like companies don't just go, oh right, we got like these tax breaks, or the global economy is doing better. Well, let's pass these savings on to our customers. Basically, never happens. Only very few companies do that. It all just goes to the shareholders. So things are only going to get more expensive. So actually, as you're chasing that number, so even if the number was 1 million today, like, oh, you need to hit 1 million, in 25 years' time, that number will probably be like 1.5 million. But even still, it's not 1 million, because 1 million is not really a great number to retire on. And you might be thinking, yeah, but there are loads of people that retire on, like £100,000 when they're like 65. And it's like, yeah, and those people live in extreme poverty. People don't realize that. They live in extreme poverty and they have to rely on help from the government, which is not great for them. So, it's not an ideal situation to be in. But yeah, the ratio is just completely off. So the numbers you need to hit in order to like maintain the same quality of life and actually just have an okay quality of life, like a paid off house, 1 or 2 holidays a year, some hobbies, a social life, maybe 2 or 3 children, and to afford them a good quality of life, and to be able to afford to maintain your house and maybe have an okay car, and maybe, try interesting things and have a takeaway every so often, and maybe go out to restaurants every now and again, which are obscenely expensive. That number that you need to hit is out of reach. And it's also unfair that you have to spend 25 years plus of your life in order to potentially hit a number to allow you to afford that lifestyle. When in the past, you could afford that lifestyle whilst working, whilst also obtaining the capital to have that quality of life in retirement. So you could have your cake and eat it too. Now you can't have your cake or eat the cake. You can't have either, because you can't afford the quality of life while you're working, because you get taxed to high heaven and the cost of living is super high and only getting higher. But then also, because of those things, you can't save enough at a high enough rate. And it's not necessarily the amount you save, it's the savings rate, right? So you can earn minimum wage, but if you have a ridiculously high savings rate, you can afford the same lifestyle that you had whilst working. But, trying to retire on minimum wage, if you work your whole life on minimum wage and trying to retire in any capacity is, I wouldn't want to do it. I wouldn't want to do it. That's going to require some pretty insane sacrifices. But, someone on 50,000 is not going to be able to earn 50,000, enjoy life to its fullest, and have a decent quality of life, and also be able to have a great retirement. You can't have both, and you can't even have a good quality of either. So you can't really have a great pension, a great retirement, or have a great standard of living anymore. You can't even have one. So in the past, you could either have both, or you could choose, and you could have like a really good standard of living on just your income and just save nothing for the future because I'm going to be dead by 50. A lot of people had that mentality and then suffer in retirement. Or you could save for your retirement and have a ridiculously good retirement and just go on like cruises all year round. I mean, that's the thing now where we're seeing a lot of like boomers and baby boomers and stuff, Gen X, who just have an obscene amount of wealth because they have these properties that have literally like 10 to 20 to 30x in price from when they bought it. And they've taken out equity, or they've sold and they've downsized, and they've got loads of money, and they've had defined benefit pensions, and they've been in the stock market a long time, and it's gone through these lows, but also extreme highs, all-time highs, and now they're living the high life in retirement, but also were afforded a ridiculously good quality of life while they were working, and now people, getting neither. They can't have either of them. They literally cannot have either of them. And that is why it's now the amount of money that you have is kind of irrelevant. It's how much time do you have for you? That's the new currency. How much time do you have for you? Like, how much time do you have to spend on your hobbies, which won't be expensive, but time to spend, I don't know, in nature or reading books or spending time with friends or pottering around the garden or, you know, learning new skills and spending time with your children and spending time with your partner or wife or husband, whatever. That's kind of the new currency now where, you know, you need to sort your living expenses out, but then it's not, okay, how many fancy things do you have on top? Like what fancy car do you have? What crazy holidays you go off? The new currency is, you know, do you have somewhere to live and how many hours a week do you work? And if it's like if you can afford to work less than 30 hours a week, you're living the dream. Like that's real wealth now. That's true, actual, real wealth. It kind of transcends money. You can't put a price on your time. You used to be able to put a price on your time because, like I said, the ratio made sense. It doesn't make sense anymore. Like, it's kind of insane to work 50, maybe 40 to 50 hours a week, doing some absolute BS job that really doesn't matter. All the stress and the crap that comes with it. You get none of the benefits of like owning the company or being a shareholder. You get all the drawbacks and you get paid and you just exist. And you're just like, that's not a good trade at all. That's an awful trade. But if it's like, okay, well, I only work 30 hours a week, I only work 3.5, maybe 4 days, depends on the week. I have less to spend, maybe, disposable, like after all your bills are paid, maybe like disposable income to spend on yourself. Maybe it's only £300, which is, these days, £300 disposable income, it's pretty good. But, if you could get to that and only work 3 or 4 days and not have to worry about anything else, you're pretty rich. That's real wealth, right? That's real, actual, tangible wealth that most people will now never achieve without drastic lifestyle changes. Because a lot of people have just fully bought into the way things are. They're content with being grossly underpaid. They're content with training for a job for 5 to 10 years and then basically maxing out at £40,000, which is an absolutely abysmal salary now. Pre-COVID, pretty good. Now, it's hard to live off. I don't know how people on minimum wage do it, to be honest with you. That's a brutal way to live on minimum wage. Maybe if you have two people, if you have two people that work in a household, you get two sets of personal allowances, two sets of low taxes, so it can be okay, but single earner households not a chance. But time really is the new currency. If you can carve out more time, I'm trying to carve out more time for myself because I'm just finding that the trade-off is just not worth it. Why spend years and years and years upskilling and trying to do better and be better and do all this stuff, and then you try to get like a higher paid job and they're just like, yeah, no, we're just not going to pay you that, or the tax man's just going to take it all, or we're going to work you to the bone, or you're just going to hate life because you're going to be so stressed you're not even going to want to like actually live your life after you finish work. So time and peace of mind, that's the currency. That's wealth. That's kind of where we're at.